We say sit in your seat in a straight row, or in early childhood, crisscross applesauce on your spot on the circle rug, and do not touch, poke, grab, or do anything to anyone around you. And then we say, hey, why are they not out engaged in the world in creative curiosity kind of activities?
What if the skills that matter most at work were the ones that you learned before you could even tie your shoes? Welcome to Work Better, the Steelcase podcast, where we talk with experts about how to help the world work better. I'm your host, Chris Congdon, and my guest today is pediatrician and author Dr. Laura Jana. Dr. Jana has spent more than 25 years helping people of all ages develop the human skills needed to adapt and succeed in a rapidly changing world.
Those skills that we're talking about are the human skills that AI does not do well, which means that their value just keeps going up in this world where it becomes more important to be able to ask a good question than just know the answer.
She understands that the skills that children need to thrive are the same skills that teams and organizations need to innovate, adapt, and succeed in an AI-powered world. And she's built a framework that translates those skills into clear, practical guidance that leaders can use today. In my conversation, we unpack how her framework can transform the ways that we work, lead, and collaborate. Here's more from Dr. Jana. So, Dr. Jana, welcome to Work Better.
Well, thanks. I'm honored to be here.
You know, you do stand out from so many of our other guests because I think maybe you are our first guest who has worked with toddlers and is the very first pediatrician we've had on Work Better. And so I want to start there, actually, because I think so much of your work is with babies and toddlers and early childhood development, but you know, you've really taken that work and also moved into what the adults and those of us who are in the business world are dealing with. So could you just even start there and talk a little bit about your journey? Like, how does the work that you started doing with children apply to the things that we're thinking about in the workplace today?
You know, my trying to be funny answers always said I just have a broad definition of pediatrics.
Okay.
And I just keep getting broader. But there's actually a really simple logical answer, and then I'll just tell you a couple details of how I got here, which is I think it's been very uncommon for people to ever think of the fact, it's a super obvious one, that children become adults. And,
Right.
you know, we think of supply chains and we look further upstream in a supply chain and we know that what comes from all the core components of something ends up the final product. But I don't think that people spend enough time thinking about the fact that what happens in those early foundational stages of the, human capital pipeline actually impact later on down the road. So in a way, that's sort of how you can explain a lot of what I do, is that in my business audience talks, I call it upstream innovation. And then the last part of this, because you, like most people now, associate me with early brain and child development because I spend a lot of time focused on that. I always have to remind people I'm not just an early childhood person, I'm a root cause person. Yeah, in my skills, I reference the 5 whys and getting to the root cause of a problem in the business side. I said, in the same way, if you were going to be root cause, I keep telling people you need to move younger. Now move younger. Now move younger if you want to impact anything. And it can be the medical things, obesity and various forms of disease and all those sorts of things. But it also can be skills and cognition and learning and all
Right.
those things that take the trajectory into the business workforce world.
So I want to stay talking about children just a little bit longer because I think, there's a lot of behaviors or mindsets that as we mature that we lose. And I'm curious what you think about, are there skills that we had as children that we need to relearn now as adults?
Yeah, it's a great question, one I get asked all the time, as you might imagine. Like, if these are the skills most valuable for thriving, the human skills needed to thrive in an AI-powered world, which is how I've framed them, then how do we train them, right?
Right.
The first thing I will tell you is, yes, there are some of these skills that children are born with and that they're actually better at than most adults.
Okay.
And there's really obvious ones, curiosity, right? I mean, the problem is in early childhood, you take something like curiosity or hands-on engaging with the world around you and things, and they don't always get translated into positive attitudes by caregivers, right? Parents and caregivers. When you're talking about a young child, right? They get into everything doesn't really sound like a positive attribute.
Right.
Where if you think about limitless curiosity, hands-on engagement, motivation, and creativity, doing things differently,
Sure.
really, really excel in those things. The second part of what you said, I mean, so certainly there are some things that children do really well, but I would add to what you said is, and sometimes we do a really good job of actually training those skills out of children. So it's not just like a developmental foregone conclusion that they're not going to have them as they get older. So much of our education and our culture over the last 100 years, the industrial era, we have not shifted our way of teaching, of how we think about learning, and especially not incorporating what we know about the brain development enough to say, hey, wait, if we recognize these skills and we value them, then why are we doing this in the classroom? Because it works against that skill. Creativity being a big one. You need some time and boredom. You need hands-on engagement, but we say sit in your seat in a straight row, or in early childhood, crisscross applesauce on your spot on the circle rug, and do not touch, poke, grab, or do anything to anyone around you. And then we say, hey, why are they not out engaged in the world in creative curiosity kind of activities?
Yeah. Well, I have stopped putting blocks in my mouth as I've gotten older, but even that's a form of exploration, right? It's like, it's not socially appropriate to chew on our toys anymore.
Yeah, it was part of your question, and you reminded me because I almost forgot to say it. There are some things that developmentally speaking, young children don't do as well, or just aren't capable of doing until they get older. The main one, which I spend a lot of time discussing, are executive function skills.
Sure.
Which I always put emphasis when I'm speaking to the business world, conveniently named executive function skills. It's like your focus and your attention, your impulse control, your stop, think through your actions, change directions based on new information. Those skills, from a neuroscience standpoint, they're based in the prefrontal cortex, and they are what make us stop and think through our actions.
Right.
What most people do not know is, one, they have their most rapid rate of development in the right conditions between the ages of 3 and 5. All right. But they don't fully develop until the mid-20s, maybe even later. Right. And so expecting sort of that control yourself, stop, think through your actions. Why would you do that? Because you know better. If you're saying that to a 2-year-old, it's sort of like getting upset with them because they don't tie their shoes, when we know that it's more like 5 when kids learn to tie their shoes. So there is a developmental component to some of the skills where we just know it has to develop over time. And others, we just have to be careful we don't train it out of them, or we make the conditions and the environment right to nurture the other skills.
Yeah. So, Dr. Jana, you've developed a framework for skills that you call key skills. And not key, K-E-Y, like you open a door with it, but Q-I. Can you tell us about, first of all, the origin? Where did the key come from? And then what's your framework? And can you kind of quickly talk us through these critical skills?
Sure. So I'm going to give you, first of all, the really kind of the impetus for me coming up with the name. I was familiar with emotional intelligence. I thought it did a world of good when people could kind of grasp all of this information, new science, all sorts of understanding, crossing different sectors well into the business world, but also in other realms, with a nice, easy to understand sort of definition. And so I thought, okay, here I am, and I'm looking at both health and education. And I said, what I was hearing in all directions are, children and adults do not have the skills they need. And then take your pick, entering kindergarten or entering the workforce. And then it was a laundry list, what skills? And people were like, they just don't have the skills. And then the skills that are so valuable are the soft, non-cognitive, and other. And that almost always followed by whatever expert was speaking, saying, but we have to stop calling them soft, non-cognitive, and other. So taking that into account, I said, if I asked you, do you want soft skills or hard skills? If we're being honest, people still really value the hard skills more.
Sure.
Right?
Absolutely. Well, it's easier to get your head wrapped around, I think, sometimes.
And I'm going to give you an example and then say why I thought I'm going to come up with this name, which was I started recognizing that the titles of Harvard Business Review articles were indistinguishable from the titles in the preschool literature.
Oh, so interesting.
We're all talking about the same thing. How did I actually come up with key specifically? I was like, okay, it has to be simple. It has to be memorable in terms of this framework. And I happened to sit next to a group of very accomplished entrepreneurs at the TED conference. And I was sitting next to one who had just sold his company, had done very well. He was based in India, and he said he was starting a new company. And I said, oh, well, that's great. What's your new company about? And he said, well, it's called GoKey. And I was like, I'm sorry, how do you spell that? And he said, GOQI or QII. He said, like May the Force be with you from Star Wars, right?
Oh,
Right. So you know where I'm going with this, Chris. Instantly, I was like, anytime you can work Star Wars into a conversation, you're going to get people's attention. But he was referring to the idea of ki, which is also pronounced chi. But what he was talking about was positive energy, positive force.
yeah.
And I was trying to find a simple name for a framework of skills that were a positive life force, right? I also thought we don't have a name to call these other academic technical skills, so I called them IQ skills, not in a formal IQ testing, but that's all the content knowledge and things that we've always prioritized. It's the complement to the IQ skills, QI, right? So IQ and key.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, so let's talk specifically. Could you walk us through these skills and then maybe talk about the ones that we really struggle with?
Sure. And I'm going to give you the really quick version because it's easy to find information on the specific skills. But
Okay.
here's the quick overview. I wanted them to be easy, gut feel to them. They do sound a little Dr. Seuss-like, but not too cute because I intentionally created the framework to work in early childhood and in business. Okay?
Right.
Me, we, why, will, wiggle, wobble, what if. Okay?
Got it.
If I were to ask someone, what do you think me skills? They might struggle like they can't make up what the definition is necessarily, but it's self-awareness, self-control, impulse control, focus, attention. What I like to say for the business world is pointing out the fact that, Peter Drucker, who people are more familiar with in that side of my audiences, that Peter Drucker had said that while the 20th century was the era of business management, the 21st century is going to be the era of self-management. Self-management are executive function skills. It fits into my definition of me. And I always say, and by the way, that's how you relate Peter Drucker to 3-year-olds biting. They haven't fully developed their executive function skills yet.
Right.
So that's me skills. We skills are a bit more intuitive, if you had to guess, but the simple answer is they're the play well with other skills, right?
Which we could use more of in the world and in the workplace. So.
You got it. And for each of these skills, they have a related part in the brain. All the neuroscience has started to build up around these areas of the brain and what gets controlled and things. And so things like empathy, people have done, MRIs of Tibetan monks' brains, and it's like looking at the world bodybuilding contest of empathy, right? So we know it's trainable. We know it has a course over which it develops in young children, in those early years. Perspective taking. Well, you cannot tell me that in the workplace, no one's ever discussed how it's really valuable to have people with multiple perspectives, understanding someone else's perspective, active listening. And those are the skills that have their foundational development that I called the we skills in early childhood.
Got it.
So me and we together fit the formal definition of emotional intelligence. Why skills, I'm going to go quickly, is questioning and curiosity. The risk there is that we train it out of children. I have a whole discussion about why is it that we have to pay so much money for the 5 Whys and Lean and Six Sigma and all those things to high-level professionals if we hadn't trained some of those skills out of children when they were younger.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So me, we, why, will, motivation, and drive. I would imagine a lot of people listening are familiar with Daniel Pink and the book Drive. Sure. And again, I don't have the answer to how we get all of these, but recognizing that internal drive is what people hire for, what they want, and what's going to be needed in a really complex world to keep being motivated.
Sure.
So I always like to say me, we, why, will, wiggle. Wiggle, I amused myself in a way calling it a skill. In the adult world, in the business world, right? Think of the words. We have movers and shakers and spring into action and reach for the stars. And there's all these really positive action words that describe, in particular, innovators, right? They
Sure.
never sit still. They take the world apart and put it back together again and hands-on. In the early childhood, and not just early childhood, it could be K-12, right? Education side, they can't sit still. They have ants in their pants. They, hands off, don't touch, don't poke, don't grab kind of mentality. And what we know about young children, but really everybody, it's just young children learn best when they get to interact in the world with a hands-on sort of way. Then the wobble skills are one that the business world in particular is really fond of.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been asked about my wobble skills in a job interview. So tell us about wobble skills.
Okay, so it's interesting you say that. And the reason you wouldn't have been asked is because I coined the term for use in this purpose. But have you ever heard any discussions about the importance of failure and learning from your mistakes and intelligent risk taking?
Of course.
That is what I called wobble skills. Because one, I don't think we're ever going to convince people truly to believe that failure is like a good thing and I'm excited about it. And technically, it's not the failure you're looking for. You're looking for the ability to learn from your mistakes, right? Learn and overcome mistakes and keep going. And so that's where I thought, okay, the term wobble comes from Weebles wobble, but they don't fall down.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like all failure is the same. Massive failure is a really big problem in life, in the business world, but intelligent risk taking and allowing people, whether it is a child being allowed to do something, get it wrong, try to figure it out instead of just who gets the answer first, best, fastest, or somebody in the workplace who's willing to take initiative and try something new, knowing that even if it doesn't work out, they could get celebrated for, sort of new creative thinking. And the last one is, again, pretty obvious if I say, what if? I sort of laughed when I realized, because I've been going to the TED conference for years and years and years, the number of TED Talks that start out with, what if? And they're telling you, try to imagine something that you haven't thought of or seen before. And it's creativity and innovation and imagination and things that people use that for. And I said, okay, there's a different network in the brain that is responsible for creative thought. It's like your brain gets to meander for a while and make unusual or unlikely connections that it hasn't made before. And here's something interesting to know about it, which is why it's useful to have these different skills and understand them is, if you are too rigid on your executive function skills, the rule following, the stop and think through your actions and sort of the logic of it, that part of the brain puts the brakes on the creativity part of the brain. So that's where you say, okay, in a world that really, the shiny object is innovation, right? We have to be careful that we don't focus so much on, on things like the me skills and the control and the rules and things that we end up training out or taking away the environment and attitudes that cultivate creativity.
So you mentioned before a couple times, and I feel like everybody's talking about AI all the time and what new skills we need in the age of AI. And to go back to the earlier language, a lot of times it might be hard skills like, how is my prompt engineering going? Can you talk about these 7 skills? Is there any one of them or 2 of them that you'd say, like, these are even more important than ever?
Let me just paint the big picture context, 2 points. And everybody tends to agree with this. Can you see that the world is increasingly becoming globally complex and connected and changing rapidly? In that context, if I were to say to you, what skills become more valuable? Well, let's take a rapidly changing world. In a rapidly changing world, you're going to have to move quickly. You're going to have to persist. You're almost guaranteed to fail because the answer is not going to be known yet. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, it becomes more important to be able to fail and adapt than it is to just who's the fastest person getting the answer. Mm-hmm. The other thing is all of those sort of hard skills. And again, I always say, listen, I am not telling you that reading, writing, arithmetic, coding, technical knowledge is not important. But as far back as 2016, what I noticed was the World Economic Forum came out with the report of the 21st century skills needed most. And it was an education report saying we need to be training people for these skills. Mm-hmm. About a third of them were those hard skills. Really important. And they included content and literacy and civic literacy and numeracy and financial literacy and things. But 2/3, second and third column, related to rapid change and global complexity. But those skills that we're talking about are the human skills that AI does not do well, which means that their value just keeps going up in this world where it becomes more important to be able to ask a good question than just know the answer, because you can get the answer in 0.02 seconds or whatever it is you can search on your phone. Mm-hmm. And even, you mentioned prompt engineering. I like to point out to people, if you are not good at asking good questions, the why skills, right?
Yeah.
You are not going to make it as a prompt engineer, because everybody who's ever entered a not well thought out prompt gets a really not useful answer.
Yes, I have personally experienced that for sure. And maybe I had to wobble a few times to get better at that.
Yeah.
So another thing I want to ask you about Dr. Jana, is I know that when you have worked with children, you've probably been in a lot of classrooms, or you've been in physical environments where children learn, or maybe they struggle to learn. And I'm really curious if there are things that you have seen in those environments that you would say to those of us who are thinking about the workplace, like, are there things that we should be trying to adapt into the workplace that maybe got left behind in the classroom?
Sure. And we know that it is two things that shape the brain, how it develops the foundational architecture of the brain, right? One is interactions, right? It's experiential, it's
Yes.
relational.
Yes.
Okay. And that does apply to the workplace because think about how much we now see about engagement and trust and all the things coming out of
Right.
Gallup that impact the hardcore KPIs that people worry about, right?
Yeah.
But it's also the environment.
Okay.
Environment and experiences shape brain development for children.
Yes.
And on one hand, environment can be, homelessness or, food insecurity, but it also can be the physical environment.
Sure.
And if somebody is in a conducive environment, it impacts how they think, how they learn, and how their brain and cognition develops. So knowing that as a core principle, it gave me the ability to look at, whether it's talking to the high level architects or it could be hospital design. I've seen incredibly interesting things about hospital design or about places where you can literally bring down someone's tension level. You can enhance their focus and attention because they need me skills for whatever. But you can also create an environment where we skills thrive, where you aren't intimidated coming into the space and it seems like a shared space where everybody. I have new respect. Again, I always say I had respect before, but I have new respect for well thought out design in that regard because we know those things often get discounted.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're learning so much more about enriched environments, again, whether it's in a learning environment or a working environment, that things that are stimulating to people, things that, are interesting, that can help you feel like greater creativity or greater Y skills. A lot of times we might have in the past thought of those things as superfluous, but it certainly sounds like, there's a lot of neuroscience behind why we would want to have those kinds of environments. Before I let you go, I just want to talk about if an organization wanted to really help cultivate key skills into like a leadership development program, are there one or two like concrete practices that you'd say really just start focusing on this as a place to get going?
Yeah, and it's a question I get asked a lot as the uptake on this key skills and people realizing they're valued. The first thing I would say is sort of a conceptual one, which is start to measure, identify, reward, like praise the things you actually care about. So if you care about things like somebody who's willing to take risks and fail and then quickly get back up and here's the learnings and share that with people, those people don't often get celebrated in a lot of workplaces, right? It's your team failed. And so I've seen everything from a kindergarten classroom to high-level business doing some sort of failure recognition. In kindergarten, that translates into a teacher saying, hip, hip, hooray, we have a risk taker in class today, which I will tell you was in the kindergarten classroom in Silicon Valley. The other thing I'd say for leadership, and again, the skills, I'm working on because there's lots of examples about, but taking a look and saying, how do these relate to I would say these key performance indicators, as in QI, actually enhance a lot of people's KPIs, right? Or impact their KPIs. And start paying attention to those things, thinking it through. When I do trainings for teachers, I say, take out your curriculum and tag your curriculum with the key skills so that you see where you're doing it and what you're doing with them or where you're not. I say the same thing to business leaders, and I say, do that. I will be writing a key skills for business specific book, but there are so many examples where you say, if you focus on the trust and the engagement, giving the time, the space, recognizing the things you value, you actually see performance in your much more traditional KPI metrics, and engagement being key, such that I tell people we should be thinking of CEOs as chief engagement officers.
Dr. Jana, it has just been a delight, but also I feel like I've learned so much. Like a lot of these skills I think we've talked about and thought about before, but I think your framework is a really helpful way for us to understand kind of the diversity of skills that we all need going forward, particularly to your point in this environment of just so much rapid change and complexity and uncertainty. So I personally, I'm going to lean into my wiggling and my wobbling and my what ifs going forward. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Interested in the latest workplace research, insights, and design ideas? Follow Steelcase on LinkedIn to learn how the workplace can be a strategic asset for your organization to help improve engagement, productivity, and well-being. Connect with us and join the conversation today.
From curiosity to resilience to the power of asking better questions, Dr. Jana shows us how the earliest stages of life shape our success as leaders, teammates, and humans. And I certainly feel more confident about my wobbling now. If you enjoyed today's episode, would you share it with a friend or colleague? And be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And please visit us at steelcase.com/research to sign up for the Work Better Weekly newsletter to get workplace research and design ideas delivered right to your inbox. Thanks again for being here, and we hope your day at work tomorrow is just a little bit better. Thank you to everyone who helps us work better, including our producers, Katie Pace, Rebecca Charbowski, Stav Kontas, Chiara Licari, and Brandon Lasik. We are thankful for the creative art direction by Aaron Ellison and Emily Cowdery, and for the editing and sound mixing by Soundpost Studios, and the technical support by Mark Caswell, Sean McManaman, and Jose Jimenez. Our digital publishing is by Areli Ariano and Jordan Marks.